Okay, guys, the Comics Kid 2099 here, and I'm here to talk to you about an X-Men book. X-Treme X-Men. Intifada, or Intifada, I don't know how to say that word, and this collects issues 24 and 31 through 35 of X-Treme X-Men. As I mentioned last week, the previous volume skipped over an issue where Cannonball decides to join the X-Treme X-Men team. Issue 24 basically shows how Cannonball got to that point in his life where he wanted to join this team. And then we jump forward to the events after God Loves Man Kills 2, and suddenly Wolverine is no longer on the book, I guess because Claremont was ready to bring Rogue and Gambit back into the team, but Wolverine no longer Storm's caretaker. Storm is still a little uneasy on her legs from stuff that happened way back in Volume 2. I'm kind of surprised that Claremont is still dragging that out. With how fast and loose he plays with a lot of the other plot elements and character stuff in this series, I'm surprised that he's still doing stuff with Storm being injured and still not 100% healed yet. But he is, and so basically I'm just going to go ahead and talk about Storm real quick since I'm already talking about her. In this entire storyline, Storm and Gambit are separated from the rest of the group. They are talking to all of these, not really world leaders, but people who hold high positions in governments around the world. Colonel Vazhin, who is basically the Russian Nick Fury, and he's a character from the X-Men comics from the 1980s. He's there. Valerie Cooper is there. All these people from different governments around the world are there, and Storm is basically saying, you guys need a mutant response team to deal with the mutant criminals of the world. And she has this sales pitch, and after a little while, they all buy it, and so the governments of the world all form the XSE, which is not the same XSE that Bishop came from in the future, because if you remember, Bishop comes from a possible future that's like 80 years down the line, and he was part of Xavier's Security Enforcers, I think is what it is. That is not what this XSE is, but I think it's meant to evoke that same idea. Like, oh, okay, this could one day become the Xavier Security Enforcers that Bishop was a part of. So anyway, Storm is basically trying to say that the governments of the world need mutants to help deal with mutants, because otherwise the humans and the mutants are all going to just kill each other off. We need somebody here to make sure that everybody, human and mutant, follow the rules. Nobody is above human laws, not even people with superpowers, and so you need other people with superpowers to kind of handle those people and make sure that they abide the laws. And this is kind of the second time in this series that Claremont has decided that he is going to change the status quo. The first time, of course, the X-Treme X-Men was supposed to be a splinter group of mutants who are searching for the Destiny's Diaries, and the Destiny's Diaries were 13 books that told the future, and then this team was trying to find them. Well, then after Volume 2, Rogue decides we don't have to look for those books anymore, and so then basically I guess you could say the team went a few stories without really having a status quo. From that point, you kept hearing Storm and Sage like 105 times. They say that X-Men need to be helping the people. If Xavier is out there helping the mutants, Xavier and his X-Men, then this group of X-Men needs to be out there helping the baseline humans. And one thing that I keep noticing that they keep saying in this series is that the school serves its function, we are going to serve our function. And they say that about 1 billion times in this series. So if you wanted to have a little bit of fun and possibly drink yourself into a coma, you can have a drinking game. Every time someone says the school serves its function, we serve our function, take a drink, but just be very careful because you're going to be extremely liver damaged by the time you're done. So anyway, Storm and Gambit are basically making this sales pitch throughout this entire book, and they don't interact with the rest of the team at all in this storyline. And so while all that's going on, you've got Bishop and Sage and Cannonball, and they are meeting with Rogue, and well, they're meeting with Rogue wherever she lives, Valet Solita or something like that. It's in Louisiana, I think. And basically, while they're there, there is this baseline human girl who tries to blow up this concert where there are mutants and humans hanging out. And we find out that this girl, when she was 16, a group of mutant punk kids, they ran her family off the road, and everyone died except for her. And so now she hates mutants, and she wants all mutants to die and mutant lovers to die. So even if you're a human being and you don't have mutant powers, if you're hanging out with mutants, then you need to die, according to this girl. And so then it's about the X-Men group trying to help her fight this in court. They're trying to bring these kids who killed her family to justice. It's not really working out. We find out that there's this mutant guy who is going to this neighborhood, and he's trying to force all of these humans in this neighborhood to leave, and he's offering to buy their homes, but if they won't sell their homes, then he starts using his mutant powers to give them nightmares to the point where they feel like they have no other option than to just leave their homes and let the mutants move in. And all of that is tied to X-Core. In fact, all of that is tied to the girl whose family was killed by mutants. It's all kind of tied together. And basically, the X-Treme X-Men, they realize, yeah, this girl tried to kill a whole bunch of mutants, but it's also a tragedy what happened to her family. And so we need to make sure that justice is done. It doesn't matter if she's not a mutant. It doesn't matter if mutants were the ones who did this. It matters that justice be done. And so they are trying to help this girl have justice for her family, while also they're trying to put a stop to the corruption going on in X-Core. And we find out that Elias Bogan, who was featured in the Schism storyline in Volume 3, he is the guy, we've never actually seen his physical body, but he has a connection to Sage. At some point, sometime in the past, he had a psychic hold over Sage, and he is somehow connected to this lawyer working for the X-Core group, trying to run humans out of this neighborhood. And all of that is kind of tied together. It doesn't really make a lot of sense when I try to explain it. It makes a lot more sense when you read it. But this is probably the first book that has really, it's not a complete story. It's just running off of stuff that was set up in previous stories. Elias Bogan, that's something that if you just jumped into the series now, you would have no idea who or what Elias Bogan is. In fact, having read the Schism storyline not too long ago, I still don't really know what Elias Bogan is or what exactly his connection to Sage is. And then you've got the punk kids who ran the human girl's family off the road. They're actually the same punk kids from the Schism storyline, specifically the Expose miniseries, where those reporters were interviewing the X-Men. Same punk kids from that miniseries. They're back, and they're here. And then also, you've got some references to stuff that was going on in other X-Men books at the time. Magma, she shows up towards the end of this storyline, and I guess she's going to be joining the team here in a little bit, maybe in the next volume or the one after that. But basically, she was crucified on the front lawn of the school in the Holy War storyline in Chuck Austin's run on Uncanny X-Men. And they mentioned that here, and then they also mentioned something that was happening in Nunzio de Flippis and Christina Weir's New Mutants series, which I may review that series after I finish X-Treme X-Men. I'm still on the fence on if I should review that series, because only half of it was collected in trade. But anyway, so this is reviewing or referencing a lot of stuff that was going on in other X-Men books in other series, and also other volumes of this series, other storylines of this series. So not really a good jumping on point, even though this is kind of where the new status quo takes effect. It's still referencing a lot of stuff that happened in earlier volumes. So if you hadn't been reading X-Treme X-Men and you were thinking you might want to because, you know, you see Gambit and Rogue on the cover, you really like those two, so you're going to check out what's going on here. First of all, Gambit and Rogue don't even share any screen time in this book at all, so that's a little misleading. And second of all, a little bit of X-Men knowledge is required of stuff that was going on around this time to really understand what's going on with this book. But I would say that the plotting is getting better. There at the beginning of X-Treme X-Men, the plot was really just unreadable in places, and at times it was readable, just wasn't very good. I would say it's getting better as Claremont gets along, and that makes sense because Chris Claremont is one of those guys who, when he first starts on a series, it takes him a little while. It takes him a little bit of time to get going and really find his groove in a series. Even with X-Men, which is a series that he was working on X-Men for 16 years, and then he came back and was working on Uncanny X-Men for 2 or 3 years in the late 90s, and then he went from that immediately from Uncanny X-Men to X-Treme X-Men. It still takes him a little bit of time, a little bit of room to try and find what he wants to do with the series. And unfortunately, whenever he was only on X-Treme X-Men for, I think, 7 volumes, this is volume 6, so I guess 8 volumes, he was only on the series for 8 volumes, and it takes him till about volume 6 to really start finding his stride with this series. That's unfortunate because if he had gone another 10 or 12 volumes, this series could have been really fantastic. Unfortunately, as I've said in some of my earlier reviews of his work, he was having to work in and around what other writers were doing with the X-Men, and sometimes that works out really well. I was always under the impression that Claremont really hated Grant Morrison's work on New X-Men, but he's referenced some of that stuff and made it work really well with what he's doing here in Extreme X-Men. So that's interesting. But then at times, he's also having to work around stuff that other writers have done, and I'm almost thinking that he doesn't really like what they've done. Like, it really feels like he's trying to get Magma to a place that he wants her, and he's almost resentful that other writers were doing stuff with Magma, and he's having to kind of get this character past where those writers had her so that he can do stuff with her. I don't know. Maybe he doesn't feel that way. It just kind of feels that way to me. But overall, I didn't think this was a bad story. I want to talk about the art real quick. Last volume was God Loves, Man Kills 2, and I didn't really care for Igor Kordy's artwork in that book. And I feel like his art has gotten better here. Maybe it just takes me some time to get used to his art, or maybe it just takes Kordy a little bit of time to really settle in, kind of like Claremont. But I feel like his art is better here than it was in God Loves, Man Kills 2. Or maybe it's just that I've gotten used to it now that I've read a couple volumes of his work. But I really like what he was doing here a lot more than I did in the previous volume. So that's a good thing. Overall, I didn't think this book was bad. It's not the best X-Men book in the world, but it's a pretty decent book. If you've been reading Extreme X-Men, it's a really good book. It's probably one of the best Extreme X-Men stories so far. If you haven't been in reading Extreme X-Men, it doesn't really stand alone. It doesn't stand very well on its own, but I thought this was a really decent story. Nothing really horrible here that I needed to mention like I have with most of the other Extreme X-Men stories that I've reviewed. But that's all that I have to say about Intifada. I hope that you guys liked this video, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back next week to talk about the next volume of Chris Claremont's Extreme X-Men series. So I'll see you guys then. Have a great rest of the day.